Welcome to the Las Vegas Sun interviews. I'm Rick Anderson, the editorial page editor for the Las Vegas Sun. Our guest today is Juliana Urtubey, who made history last month when she became the first educator from Nevada to be named the National Teacher of the Year. Ms. Urtubey is a special education teacher at Booker Elementary School and previously taught at Crestwood Elementary. Ms. Urtubey, welcome and congratulations on your honor.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
Well, so this is something new to Nevada. So I'm wondering if you could kind of explain a bit about what it means to be the Teacher of the Year, the National Teacher of the Year. What are the duties, the responsibilities, the privileges, that kind of thing?
Yes, so as National Teacher of the Year, I'll spend the next year advocating for the profession, listening to different teachers, students, families, stories, amplifying those stories. I'll get to go on a speaking tour and travel across the country. And the goal is to really connect with as many education organizations as possible and really uplift this idea of a joyous and just education for all. How can all educational stakeholders come together to make sure that the spaces that our children are learning in are really joyous and just?
Well, great. And not to steal too much of your messaging here, but what will be some of the strategies that you'll be suggesting, when you're out speaking with other educators?
So since I'm a special education teacher, one of the things that I like to speak a lot about is inclusion of special education populations within all parts of a school. Another really critical part, I believe, of a joyous and just education is a holistic integration of families and communities in children's education. So how do we as teachers really get to know our students, their backgrounds, their languages, cultures, interests, and their families, and see all the wonderful things that their families bring forth and create space at the school for that family knowledge to really be uplifted. Those are some of the biggest things that I speak about that I have found to be incredibly transformation in the populations that I teach, but that I think could be really transformative in all schools.
Well, one of the things that I was kind of fascinated to learn about you, after the announcement was made, was that you were an early adopter of the school garden movement that's kind of taken root here in Nevada, pardon the pun, and in other states. And I'm just wondering, what brought you to that, and when you did establish the school garden at Crestwood, what results did you see from it?
Puns are intended and welcomed. I love puns. As you can see, be the best you can be. And my nickname is Miss Earth. The kids call me Miss Earth because it's a play on my last name and because I started the garden at the school. Starting the garden at Crestwood was an amazing process because it really showed me how to trust in collective teacher efficacy. That garden was started by my colleagues and I, because we had a vision for creating a space where our children could learn with hands-on, our children could have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, but more importantly, a space that was the communities, it blurred this division between the school and the community. It opened up our arms and welcomed this community into the school. And so for me, those symbolic gestures go really far. We were really lucky to be one of the first schools. We worked really closely with the organization Green Our Planet. And we designed the garden based on what we thought our students would need. We asked the families, what do you want in this garden? We really built it layer by layer, making sure that as we built it and as we expanded it, because now it's huge, it's a huge garden. It started with just 5 little garden beds. But as we built it, we made sure that we had the people power to really make sure that the garden thrived. And so what the garden meant to us was a place where all of us could learn kind of on the same plane. Talk about inclusion, right? My students with special needs thrived in the garden because garden learning is all about observation and intuition. The mothers at the school shone at the garden because they knew all about medicinal plants and they knew how to make sure our vegetables didn't go to waste. And they would once a week do cooking classes with our students in our NOMI's class, our NOMI's club before school. And then that meant that they were teaching the students fractions and safe food handling and all these wonderful things that enlist a holistic education, right? The garden was that vehicle.
And I should be transparent here as the journalist. My wife is part of the staff at Green Our Planet. So you were familiar to us in our home before you got the honor. But yeah, I think it's fascinating that you were able to draw the community in that way, and then use the gardens to advance the children's education in kind of these STEM areas. Just on a personal level, one-to-one level with the students, what kind of changes did you see there? What kind of progress did you see there?
So with my personal students that have special education needs, I saw transformation, and when we couldn't be in the garden, we brought the garden to my classroom. So in my classroom, we raised monarch butterflies, we had worm composting. There's always some kind of insect that we were learning from in the classroom. And when we designed our instruction around this idea of caretaking and this idea of intuition and observation, our students were able to personify what we call a growth mindset in an education. A growth mindset is this understanding that, one, your brain is malleable. So you're not just born smart, and the people who aren't born smart can't get smart. It kind of teaches children that you can train your brain. You can become somebody who learns in your style, but learns a little bit better. And part of that learning is through mistakes, understanding that our mistakes are chances to learn and that we celebrated our mistakes. In fact, we had a poster in my classroom that said, compost your failures, celebrate your successes. Because mistakes were always an opportunity for us to come together and support each other and really help each other. When we would go in the garden, the students would get to learn through their own intuition. So a good example is the multiplication lesson. We would send the kids out and we would say, okay, find patterns in the garden. And students would find patterns, like in the strawberry plants, there's 3 leaves per plant. There's how you learn how to multiply by 3. So the students would draw the strawberry plants and then skip count and then write a multiplication sentence. And I had students who weren't able to be successful in multiplying in the classroom, but when we went out into the garden, it made sense to them. They became stewards and leaders. So they would go out with me in my small group when we were with all the students that had special ed needs. And then they would go back with their classroom, and then the classroom would go back out and do another lesson. And that student would be able to share what they knew about the garden, or they would be the person who knew where all the trowels were or all the clippers were. That person had more leadership. And it was just beautiful to see because it gave the space for the students to really be autonomous.
Well, I'd like to zoom out a little bit now and ask you some kind of broader questions about education. And if you could snap your fingers and make anything happen in terms of laws or public policies, I'm wondering what are one or two things that you would do to improve public schools or facilitate better support for educators?
I think the first thing that I would do would be to make sure that all decisions that get made from a school, in a school, or for schools has incredible amount of teacher voice and teacher approval. Teachers are incredible experts. We are professionals. We know what our students and communities need. And so I think that this is a transformation that we're starting to see in education right now, where there's a lot of teacher voice. And so I would just make sure that everything is teacher stamped and approved, because sometimes policies and laws have unintended consequences that most teachers can see from a mile away. And so I think that we would save our children a lot of heartache and a lot of unnecessary movement. The second would obviously be funding. And I know that that's something else that the state of Nevada is working really hard to do. I think we need to have equitable funding for all of our students. And another thing that I think will really support education is the idea of teacher recruitment and retention policies. So how do we get more teachers of color to come into the profession? We know that there's specific things that impact teachers, right? Or future teachers. The unpaid internship of student teaching is really hard on a lot of communities. The student debt that you would end up with after your college degree and the salary teachers make. So really putting the money in those things to make sure that the profession is respected in the way that it deserves. The other one, which is like kind of in the midst of happening right now, is fully funding IDEA, which is Individuals with Disabilities Act. The federal government's supposed to fund 40% of it for each state, but they're not able to. And so what that means is states have to use their budgets to fund that remaining 40%. So if the federal government was able to fund that 40%, we would have less funds spilling out. And so those are a few of the things that I wish I could like wave my magic wand, but that I know that there's a lot of teacher leadership and a lot of policymakers that are working hard to make those things happen.
Well, I'd like to drill into a little bit the teacher recruitment and retention ideas that you brought up. I think that's something that we struggle with here in Southern Nevada. You see a lot, especially a lot of turnover in the kind of lower income Title I schools. And, in addition to what you mentioned there, is there anything we could do, on the local level that would help in that regard?
I think that you made a really important point, that it's not that there's not people that don't want to be teachers. People want to be teachers and they want to stay in the classroom. I think we need to listen really deeply to what teachers need. What are some of the reasons that they leave? So the workload could be arranged in a way where teachers spend more of their time working directly with children and more time working on systems that improve schools. So for example, the garden, I loved the garden. I loved building the garden, but 100% of the design of the garden and the time to build the garden was in our own time, was after contract hours. And while that was beautiful and, it shows how much teachers love schools, it's not a sustainable model. Teachers need to be able to do those kinds of projects within their time. So something beautiful that we're seeing right now is, since all of the Clark County schools are offering summer acceleration, the summer school, we're seeing teachers teach all sorts of fun things right now. I have a music teacher at a middle school who is a dear friend, and she's doing a hip hop rock music class where her students get to cover their favorite music, come up with their own beats. And she told me last night that this is the happiest she's ever been as a teacher. So I think that we let teachers use their strengths. We give them the space to teach, and then teachers wouldn't burn out as much, especially if that other part about teacher voice was a big part of the policies. Then teachers would feel more connected to those policies. So I think that that's the biggest thing. I think over a long term, we need to look at teacher salaries and really make sure that along with increasing teacher salaries, we're also increasing the benefits, right? So making sure that teachers have dignified, easy to work with healthcare. You have no idea how many teachers struggle with that. They have issues with making sure that they don't owe a whole lot for their medical procedures, things like that. I think those are really, really critical things that go along with teacher salary. Yeah.
Well, great. So and you know this far better than I do, but this last year has just been a very difficult one for everybody in public schools. The students, the educators, the families. But I'm wondering if you see it as an opportunity, perhaps, to make advancements, to incorporate, some of the things that we learned in the last year to improve the system.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Governor Sisolak keeps saying. He says that we have to come out of the pandemic stronger than we were before. And I really appreciate that, because there's a sense of community within that idea. And so in terms of education, one of the things that I like to brag a lot about is Connecting Kids Nevada. That was a public and private organization that came together to make sure all kids had Chromebooks and Wi-Fi hotspots. And then in addition to having the tools, there was a system that was easy for families and schools to use that made the turnover of getting the laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots really seamless. And so that built a lot of trust between the community and schools, between teachers and the community. It's a really beautiful way of saying, okay, what do you need? Here it is. And I know that State Superintendent Eber had a really big role in that. And so I think that through the pandemic, we listen to teachers and what tools students need. We give it to them, and then we continue to partner with families. This distance virtual learning would not have been possible without the support of families. I love how a lot of teachers look at it as teachers being invited into their students' homes during virtual classes. And I think that that's a beautiful way to look at it. Teachers really learn to rely on families and vice versa. And so I hope that we keep that symbiotic relationship going.
Final question, and it's a two-parter. First of all, what sparked your passion in being an educator? And then secondly, you've spent your career in Title I schools, and I wonder why that's such an important mission for you.
I think the two questions go hand in hand for me. So I was in Colombia, and then when we came to the United States, my mother didn't have access to a school that would really nurture my identity, my sisters and I, in terms of our language, in terms of our culture. So she had to go on a search to find a school that was bilingual. And then when we moved again, that wasn't possible anymore. And so I'm really grateful for my advocacy, because they came into our schools to play music and to teach Spanish classes. I realized that that ability to leverage their skills is a privilege, and it shouldn't be the determinant for a child to have a holistic nurturing identity in their school, right? And so that we should really be providing that in every single school, particularly our Title I schools. So I became a teacher because I knew that I could provide that for my students. I knew that I had similar experiences, shared a love for languages like they do, and I could build bridges between families and schools. And so that's really why I became a teacher. I became a special education teacher because I knew that that's where the most connection with families would be. And the reason I teach at Title I schools is because that's where I'm called to serve, because I can see those communities with the asset mindset that they deserve. A lot of the times we see communities for what they're lacking or the hardships. And while those things are very, very important to be working towards, I get to see the assets, and I get to invite the families and to share their assets at the school. And that brings me back to that joyous and just platform, right? It's joyous because children get to be themselves at school. There's a deep sense of belonging. And it's just because we understand all of these inequities and these barriers, and collectively we're working to fix it. We're working to make sure all of our kids have a wonderful place to learn.
Okay, I fibbed. I have one more question. I'm wondering what it meant to you, to see your name on the casino marquees and to have a day named after you or named in your honor. Just, what did that do? How did you feel about that?
It was stunning, and it was really beautiful. Superintendent Jara said it was going to be like a parade, and it really was. Like, we started driving on one side of the Las Vegas Strip, and all the marquees started turning. I got to share that moment with my family. My family was here for the announcement, and it was just really beautiful. And in the recognition of me, I keep thinking of the we, right? Because it's not just about me. It's about all the Latinas out there. I get a lot of messages about young Latinas and how excited they are to have this kind of representation. It's about the communities that I've served, the schools that I've taught at, my colleagues. It's about all of the people in my educational family. It's really the we, it's not the me. I just get to be the vessel. So I have to make sure that I keep really humble and really connected to all those voices that really inform who I am, right? And that's the idea, that it's beautiful, and I'm so proud of this recognition, but that I commit to it being a we.
Juliana Urtubey is the National Teacher of the Year, the first one from Nevada. Thank you so much for your time today, and have a great time in your year as National Teacher of the Year.
Thank you so much, Rick.